Hello everyone. In this lesson we want to discuss keys in more detail, in particular how they allow us to create relationships. So I know I mentioned foreign keys in the previous video, but I didn't really talk about it. And this is a video where we're going to get into it. And then after understanding some of these concepts, we will create additional tables and create the proper relationships using foreign keys. So when we're dealing with relational database management system, they are called relational because they allow us to create relationships between corresponding tables. The reason behind this goes to when this was created by Dr. Edgar Codd in 1969-1970. This was his PhD dissertation when he worked for IBM. And he proved that, in effect, you could create tables where you could have unique values without repetition, repetition of the values that were important to us, of course, such as, for instance, somebody's first name, middle initial, last name not being repeated in multiple tables or even in the same table multiple times, by creating these various relationships. Now, he called tables relations. But we call them, of course, tables. He called the rows that we look at, for instance, the row that I see here, a tuple. We call the row or record. He called these column names attributes. We call them column names or fields. But the idea is the same. It hasn't changed. If you take a look at this example that I have a table named product. And I have a table named order item, which is where a product is ordered and how many of that product is ordered. Notice that both tables have a primary key. There's a product ID here, it's an order item ID here, which are unique. It is possible that a product could be part of many orders. So we have what we refer to here as a one-to-many relationship. That is, one product can be part of many orders. And then what we actually represent that in the database management system is by listing a copy of this over here for each order that actually requires it. Notice that order item ID 1 has product ID 1001, but so does order item ID 4, so does order item ID 8. This repetition is perfectly expected and normal. Now, we do not want that repeated here because this identifies each product uniquely. But because this is a related table where we can see which product have we ordered, instead of listing the product name here over and over and over, we just have the product ID. And this creates what we refer to as a relationship. This being a foreign key, this being a primary key, and the foreign key is the primary key in a related table. That's where it comes from. We can also add what we refer to as referential integrity to these, which we'll take a look at later, which is not visible here. But the idea here is that if I were to go and actually enforce referential integrity on these relationships, if somebody was to go and say try to delete product 1001, the database management system, SQL Server, would not allow it because it would say there are related items in a corresponding table. You cannot delete this because then you would have what we refer to as orphaned records over here. And that's referential integrity. We'll take a look at that too. So one-to-many relationships, one customer can have many orders, one category, many products, one department, many employees. We also have situations where we have many-to-many relationships. For instance, one author can have many titles. Correspondingly, one title could be written by several authors. And how do we represent that in a relational database management system? So one way would be to say, well, I could list the author ID over here, 74, 75, 74. As you can see, but as you can see, this particular book, SQL Server, has two authors, 74 and 76. So it might be tempting to put maybe a second column, but the problem with that is, how do I know how many authors do I have? What if one book has 8 authors? I've actually seen books that have 8 authors. Do we stop at column 8 when we create the table? Do we go to column 20? Where do we go? Where do we start? So this is repeated as repeating columns, and this is a big no-no. You don't do this. The other option might be, say, well, why don't we just like reach in and put a little comma or semicolon and have a comma separated value. This is referred to as repeating groups, and this is also a big no-no because when you're trying to basically fetch information, it becomes troublesome. And what if somebody puts a comma, somebody puts a semicolon? What if somebody puts a space after the comma, somebody doesn't? It becomes a mess. So this is also a big no-no. What we do to solve the many-to-many relationship is to create a middle table, sometimes referred to as a tying-in table. And we typically name it after the two tables that are being related to each other. In this case, author and title, so we call the middle table author title. And as you can see, I've listed the primary key from author and the primary keys for title. And wherever there is a match, you just write that row. You just create an entry there. We will do one of these in our miniature database, SIS. So if you take a look over here, Jordan Winters is the author ID for 2 books, so we can actually represent that. Which books? Well, book 1 and book 3, what is 1? 1 is DB Design, 3 is SQL Server. Additionally, SQL Server has 2 authors. Which 2 authors? 74 and 76. Well, who are they? 74 is Jordan Winters and 76 is John Marr. So by using in this middle table, we can actually create a so-called many-to-many relationship, and we can also enforce referential integrity on this one. I do want to point out that occasionally you may come across a design where there is a one-to-one relationship between 2 tables. That is, one row is related to another row exactly. If you ever come across that, or if it shows up in your own design, stop and think very carefully about why you have such a situation. Because if you have a one-to-one relationship, those 2 tables should really be combined as to a single table. In almost all instances, it's extremely rare where you would have 2 tables that are related on a one-to-one relationship. I'll give you an example when this was actually the case. Years ago, Oracle Relational Database Management System had a limit on the number of columns you could have in a table. I think it was 30. But if you had more than that column, then you couldn't put it in the database. It just wouldn't accept it. So you were forced to create multiple tables and create one-to-one relationships. But since those limitations no longer exist, you seriously consider looking at why you would have such a situation. One other case that I want to point out, which we will see in one of our databases later, is a recursive relationship. That is a table that is related to itself. And we'll see an example of that in our when we learn about SQL. I just wanted to throw that out ahead of time. When we get to it, it will make more sense. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and thank you for being a great audience. As always, please share your knowledge with others, and if you're enjoying these videos, please share them with your loved ones and friends.